In the high-stakes world of international trade, some moments define nations. They are flashpoints of pressure, power, and principle. In early February 2026, such a moment was brewing. The world's largest economy seemed ready to deliver a series of ultimatums to its closest neighbor. This wasn't just another negotiation. It was shaping up to be a test of sovereignty. On one side, a Trump administration determined to rewrite the rules of North American trade in its favor. On the other, a Canadian government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, navigating an increasingly tense relationship with its most critical ally. At the heart of the conflict, the critical 2026 review of the North American Free Trade Agreement. This deal underpins nearly $2 trillion in trade and a huge chunk of global GDP. Its very extension was on the line, and Washington saw an opportunity. They didn't just want a few tweaks. The pressure was on for a fundamental capitulation on core Canadian policies. This is the story of the major pressure points that brought Canada and the U.S. to the brink. It's the story of how a nation, often seen as the quiet junior partner, began pushing back, exposing critical dependencies the United States couldn't afford to ignore. This wasn't just a trade talk. It felt more like a trade war, fought not just with tariffs, but with resolve. It all kicked off with a post on social media, a digital shot across the bow that set the stage for a confrontation. On February 9, 2026, Donald Trump made a stunning threat. He would not allow the new Gordie Howe International Bridge, a vital trade artery between Michigan and Ontario, to open. His message was blunt. Canada had been treating the United States very unfairly for decades, and he would start negotiations immediately to ensure America was fully compensated. He targeted everything from dairy tariffs to a preliminary trade discussion between Canada and China, a move he had already threatened with 100% tariffs. This was more than just rhetoric. It was the opening salvo in a campaign of intense pressure, with the U.S. Trade Representative's office making it clear that Washington's long-standing complaints were now the price for extending the Continental Trade Pact. But for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, these were attacks on Canadian sovereignty, and his government's response would continue to redefine the relationship for years to come. To really get the magnitude of this standoff, you have to look at the architecture of the trade deal itself. When the old NAFTA was renegotiated, the Trump administration insisted on a unique and controversial feature, Article 34.7, better known as the Sunset Clause. This clause means that the agreement, CUSMA in Canada, USMCA in the States, automatically dies after 16 years unless all three countries formally agree to extend it. The first chance for that extension is a mandatory joint review set for July 1, 2026. This isn't just a simple check-in. It was designed to be a moment of maximum leverage for the United States. The thinking in Washington was that the threat of the deal's total collapse would force Canada and Mexico to offer up new concessions. It turned what should have been a routine review into a high-stakes game of chicken. The political climate of early 2026 was already tense. A trade war had been simmering for years, with Trump imposing sweeping tariffs back on February 1, 2025. Though some were paused after tense negotiations, the underlying conflict never went away. Steel and aluminum tariffs remained a persistent thorn in the side of Canadian industry. Meanwhile, key Canadian figures were signaling a new posture. Mark Carney, the former governor of the Banks of Canada and England, had delivered a stark warning at Davos, not as Prime Minister, but as an influential economic thinker. He spoke of a rupture in the U.S.-led global system, cautioning that when great powers use economic ties as weapons, other nations must diversify to protect themselves. While this wasn't an official government position, it captured the mood. This sentiment did not go unnoticed in Washington. Trump retorted that Canada gets a lot of freebies and began posting inflammatory content, framing Canada as a nation that needed to be brought into line. This was the backdrop when the pressure campaign began. The looming CUSMA review was the perfect vehicle. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer had already signaled that renewal would hinge on resolving Washington's long-standing complaints. These complaints, repeated by Trump on social media, coalesced into several key battlegrounds where the U.S. demanded fundamental change. Concede, or the largest free trade zone on the planet could simply cease to exist. For the Trump administration, it was a classic transactional play. For Trudeau's government, it was the ultimate test of resilience. The pressure from Washington targeted the very heart of Canada's economic and cultural sovereignty, aiming to dismantle decades of policy in 5 key sectors. But on every front, Ottawa held a prepared and calculated line. First up was a familiar ghost of trade negotiations past: the complete elimination of Canada's dairy supply management system. For decades, the U.S. has seen this system, which protects Canadian farmers by controlling production and setting prices, as an unacceptable barrier. In his February posts, Trump called Canada's dairy tariffs unacceptable, arguing they put U.S. farmers at risk. The U.S. dairy lobby believes American overproduction could be solved if they just had unfettered access to the Canadian market. They wanted the walls to come down. Canada's answer has been a consistent and hard no. Supply management is not on the table. The Trudeau government has repeatedly framed it as a core national interest, essential for thousands of family farms. In a nod to the powerful and politically organized dairy lobby in Quebec, this position is often reinforced in French, signaling national unity on the issue. The Canadian position is clear. Caving wouldn't solve America's structural overproduction problem, but it would devastate a key Canadian sector. This wasn't a bargaining chip to be traded away. The second battleground was the new frontier, the digital realm. The Trump administration, heavily lobbied by Silicon Valley, took aim at Canadian laws like the Online Streaming Act, C-11, and the Online News Act, C-18. These laws are designed to compel streaming giants to invest in Canadian content and require platforms like Google and Meta to pay Canadian news outlets for using their journalism. U.S. trade officials have argued these laws unfairly target American companies and represent digital protectionism. Washington's stance was clear: Canada can't be allowed to set a global precedent for regulating and taxing U.S. tech giants. Again, the answer from Ottawa has been no. The refusal is based on a simple premise: cultural and media sovereignty aren't for sale. The government argues these laws are essential to level the playing field and protect the domestic media landscape from being completely overwhelmed. For decades, Canadian broadcasters have had to support Canadian content. These laws just extend that principle to digital players. The bet is that the American tech giants need the profitable Canadian market more than Canada needs to buckle to their pressure. When Meta tried bluffing by blocking news, the government didn't flinch. The third point of friction reached down to the provincial level. The Trump administration targeted provincial liquor board policies that gave preferential treatment to local Canadian wines and spirits. Trump himself complained that Ontario won't even put U.S. spirits on their shelves. Many of these provincial rules were actually retaliatory measures against U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Washington demanded that the federal government in Ottawa force the provinces to provide equal access for American products. Here, Canada's response has been a masterclass in transactional diplomacy. It wasn't just no, it was a conditional no. Ottawa linked the issue directly to the ongoing U.S. tariffs. The position, articulated with the provinces, was simple. The provincial alcohol restrictions can be discussed the moment the United States permanently removes its Section 232 tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. It's a classic tit-for-tat strategy that exposes the hypocrisy of demanding free access for your products while imposing punitive tariffs on others. The fourth battleground was over how governments spend taxpayer money. The Trump administration demanded an end to Buy Canadian policies at provincial and municipal levels, which favor domestic suppliers for infrastructure projects. This was a key part of Trump's anger over the Gordie Howe Bridge. The U.S. wants equal access for its firms to bid on these lucrative Canadian contracts. Canada's refusal is rooted in the fresh memory of the COVID-19 pandemic. The government argues that the pandemic taught a painful lesson. Over-reliance on international supply chains is a critical vulnerability. Encouraging domestic capacity through government purchasing is now a matter of national security. Plus, Canada points to the stark lack of reciprocity, as Buy American provisions are a staple of U.S. politics, and many U.S. sectors are closed to Canadian firms. The refusal is framed not as protectionism, but as prudent self-reliance. The fifth and final area is perhaps the most critical: energy. While not a formal demand for unrestricted access, the U.S. has an unspoken and deep-seated dependency on Canadian energy that it rarely acknowledges. The U.S. electrical grid in New England and New York is critically reliant on hydroelectric power from Quebec. U.S. refineries on the Gulf Coast are specifically designed to process heavy crude oil that comes almost exclusively from Canada. In 2024, about 60% of all U.S. crude oil imports came from Canada. Any Canadian pushback in this area is an implicit reminder of this leverage. The idea that a foreign government could dictate Canadian energy policy is a non-starter in Ottawa. Canadian energy policy is decided by Canadians. This isn't a theoretical issue. A disruption in Canadian energy exports could mean blackouts in Boston or stalled refineries in Texas, causing gas prices to spike across America. The power, quite literally, flows both ways. The consistent pushback from the Trudeau government is more than just a defensive blockade. It's part of a strategy to reframe the entire power dynamic. For decades, the U.S.-Canada relationship operated on the assumption of American dominance. The current Canadian strategy aims to shatter that assumption by holding up a mirror to the United States, forcing it to confront its own deep-seated vulnerabilities. The energy issue is the most potent example. The United States presents itself as an energy superpower, but this masks a crucial weakness. Its refining infrastructure is a multi-trillion-dollar system configured for heavy sour crude. Domestic U.S. shale oil is light and sweet. It's the wrong tool for the job. The system needs Canadian heavy crude. This isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a foundational pillar of the U.S. economy. Similarly, the electrical grid in the American Northeast is deeply integrated with Canadian hydro. It's a vital source of low-cost, reliable electricity that keeps the lights on. Canada's control over this flow is a subtle but powerful reminder that it's a commercial arrangement, not an entitlement. The ongoing disputes over procurement expose another dependency: supply chains. Trump's rhetoric about the Gordie Howe Bridge inadvertently highlighted this. The North American auto sector is so highly integrated that a trade war becomes a form of economic civil war. Auto parts can cross the border multiple times before a single car is finished. A tariff here or a slowdown there, and assembly lines in Michigan and Ohio would shudder to a halt. Canada's pushback is a statement that it will no longer be the junior partner absorbing all the risk. Even the standoffs on dairy and digital laws play into this. By holding firm, Canada forces the U.S. to confront its own internal issues, whether it's agricultural overproduction or the unchecked power of its tech giants. Collectively, these points of friction paint a new picture of the North American relationship. It's not a simple hierarchy. It's a complex, interwoven system of mutual and often asymmetric dependencies. The U.S. needs Canada's energy, its parts, and its market. The Trump administration, in its aggressive pursuit of leverage, has made a tactical error. It has handed Canada the platform it needs to articulate these dependencies to American audiences. U.S. industries are now forced to contemplate the true cost of a rupture with Canada. The impact of Canada's steady resistance has been profound. In Washington, the assumption that Canada would inevitably fold under pressure has been proven wrong. The defiant and principled stand has left some of the White House's pressure tactics exposed. The dynamic has started to shift. The very U.S. industries that once pushed for concessions, from auto alliances to agricultural groups, are now often the ones sounding the alarm. They understand the trillion-dollar trade relationship is not a one-way street. They fear the collapse of the trade deal far more than Ottawa does, because they would pay the immediate price. The pressure campaign designed to bend Canada has, in many ways, boomeranged. The pressure is now also on the Trump administration from within its own borders. This has been crucial, but the real long-term shift is happening within Canada itself. The Trudeau government has used the crisis to accelerate a strategic pivot towards diversification, with a stated goal of reducing Canada's economic dependence on the U.S. This isn't just rhetoric. The government has pursued other trade deals, like the preliminary talks with China on electric vehicles and agriculture that so incensed Trump. This isn't about abandoning the U.S. market, but about reducing its overwhelming gravitational pull to build resilience. The public, tired of the constant threats, has largely rallied behind this new posture of confident independence. National unity has solidified around a Team Canada approach, with the government quick to shut down any unauthorized side negotiations by opposition figures. The chill in the relationship is palpable. Tensions simmer over everything from aircraft certification to diplomatic snubs. Each issue is a symptom of the new reality. The era of quiet accommodation is over. Historians may look back on this period as a critical turning point. The Trump administration, intending to secure a decisive victory, instead gave Canada the opportunity to demonstrate its own strength. The pressure points, meant to be instruments of submission, became tools of empowerment. They forced Canada to articulate its own value, quantify American dependence, and rally its citizens around a more assertive place in the world. The new reality is that Canada is no longer just the quiet neighbor to the north. It's a strategic power in its own right. This ongoing confrontation is more than a masterclass in high-stakes negotiation. It's marking a real shift in the U.S.-Canada dynamic. The Trudeau government's strategy of disciplined, unified pushback hasn't just deflected pressure. It's helping to recalibrate the entire relationship. By holding the line on key issues, Canada is moving from a position of perceived dependency to one of strategic necessity. It proves that true strength isn't just about economic size, but about understanding the entire board and having the courage to play your hand. The Trump administration went searching for leverage and instead found a mirror, forced to confront its own reliance on the very country it sought to pressure. The old narratives are being shattered, replaced by the reality of a sovereign nation standing its ground. The road ahead for North American trade is still rocky. The CUSMA review deadline looms, and the fundamental disagreements haven't vanished. But one thing is clear. The terms of the debate have changed. The question is no longer what Canada must concede to keep the United States happy. The question is now what the United States is willing to risk by alienating its most critical partner. This story is a powerful lesson. In a world of shifting power, sometimes the most effective strategy is to stand firm, united, and secure in your own value. What do you think will happen next in the U.S.-Canada trade relationship? Will this more assertive Canadian posture last? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this analysis insightful, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the geopolitical events shaping our world. Thanks for watching.